Good evening, or whenever you happen to view this. We are moving on till chapter 4. We don't have to do much of introduction since we're recording these things, but we had last week was dealing with hijacking the pro-life movement. Today we're dealing with, as you can see, Christian media and the money men. I was just telling Justin just a second ago before we started this, I'm getting increasingly frustrated with this whole process. I think the big thing for me is if you're going to stand for something, you stand on it and you put it on your front porch. And what is so frustrating is the fact that they're pushing these things so heavily, but they're hiding it. It's just the bait and switch that is really, really frustrating me. And it just shows you Satan's the father of lies. And that's how he does things. Behind closed doors, never coming up front with actually telling you, hiding the hook per se.
Yeah. I think part of the hard part is that these organizations, institutions have learned the key phrases to use.
Yeah.
So they put Christian or some gospel or Jesus or something on there to kind of just make you feel in the back of your mind everything's okay with this. I can trust this. But the fact is that they've learned the avenues to take to be deceptive and it raises bigger questions. I know we're going to jump into it, but are we okay with these so-called Christian organizations taking funding from unchristian people? And on one side, you could justify it in your mind. On the other side, then you have to ask the question, well, if they're taking the money, are there also, because there normally is, are there also, requirements of things that need to be taught by that institution who is giving the money?
Yeah.
Such as if I give you this, then you're going to have to talk about this or say this a certain way. So it doesn't go against what we are trying to get across.
There's rarely free money.
Yeah.
There's rarely free money. It just doesn't really happen that way. Yeah, and you made the comment that they have understood that you just got to throw some buzzwords in there. Yes. Have some Christian buzzwords. And my friends, we have a lot of Christian buzzwords, and just throw those in there. Something that I got familiar with over the last 10, 15 years was gospel-centered. That became a buzzword pretty quickly. Oh, gospel-centered this and gospel-centered that. And that became a quick buzzword.
Yeah.
And some people that I still hold in high regard probably got on that train a little bit as well. But I kind of hear the gospel-centered this now, and that's kind of a gospel coalition, that type of stuff, wording. And I immediately, red flags pop in my head. And I don't know about that.
Yeah. Who wouldn't want to be known as gospel-centered, right? We all want to be known as that. But
yeah. But what does that mean?
Yeah.
And why do you have to? Yeah. Again, it's just buzzwords. Yeah. Be careful of buzzwords. We use them and don't always mean them, but be careful of the buzzwords.
Yeah. It's just another call for discernment. And that's all we're really saying and asking for. And what Megan Basham really is doing in her book is causing us to be discerning Christians like the Bible tells us to be.
And let me have a little tear here for myself and say woe is me for a second. One of the things that kind of frustrates me with this is you have, the more you know about these kind of things, the more you are on your guard. And I have people bring me literature and stuff all the time. And, hey, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? And, the first things I do is I look at it. Who's the publisher? Who's backing the book? And I have a limited, knowledge of who all these people is. I know who I follow. And that's a kind of a small circle. There's more outside of that I'm sure is fine, but I just don't know. And a lot of times you can just be, blamed for being a stick in the mud. And, you're so close, if it's not part of your favorite crew, then, well, the reason that we have to be like this is because when you dive into stuff like this and you see what is taking place in a lot of these bigger organizations and how liberal they are and who they're funded by and all this stuff that goes, you understand why I am a little, what's the word? Negative.
Yes, negative.
There's a better word for it. Negative is probably it, but the pessimistic
Yes.
on these things. They can be very pessimistic. And you turn into the bad guy. Well, this guy doesn't like anything. He'll find holes, problems with everything. Well, there's a reason for the pessimistic attitude towards some of these things, because generally speaking, the majority of things you'll see up front that has a lot of funding, I'll put it that way, a lot of Christian things that has a lot of funding. Again, this is general statement. This is not always the case, but I'm going to be a little suspect of. Why? Well, read the chapter. Kind of go from there.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
And it's I mean, our call as shepherds to guard our sheep. And if we think Paul and others tell us don't be carried away and tossed to and fro by every wind of doctrine. And so we are called to guide and shepherd and equip the saints for the work of the ministry. And part of that means is that we grow in discernment and be able to spot good theology, bad theology, things that just are kind of there in the middle, and we have to be careful about how we handle it. And we take that very seriously because we don't want to lead others astray.
We're called to be sticks in the mud. That's what you're saying. I'll take some of those bullets. I'm okay with that.
Sometimes, yes.
Yes.
Sometimes.
It gets tiring. I don't like it. It gets tiring. And I want to nothing's worse. Nothing is more difficult than looking at somebody who's excited about something, that read something they really liked, or, is excited about this organization or that organization. Nothing is more fun, or nothing is less fun than being like, I think that's kind of sketchy. And it just sucks the air out of everything. And it's just not.
Well,
really fun, but
let's use an example. All right. Yeah. Every Super Bowl, there's been a commercial on the last few years. Yeah. That He Gets Us commercial. And some would say we should be excited because it's a Christian commercial. And yet when you watch it, there's something that just rubs you the wrong way. And there's been a lot of funding, a lot of money backing this, and it makes you wonder. Oh yeah, I have a little helper today. It makes you wonder what is really going on, what is really backing this, and what are they really trying to teach, and also what is missing from what they are saying. And they are preaching something that we can't get behind. And I will tell you that right away.
Why is it that they're hitting every liberal talking point on their commercial? Why is that? Every liberal talking point, and they're punching right as they do so.
Yeah.
Why is that going on? And again, you start looking into the funding and who's doing this and that, and guess what? We'll see these things. Yeah. So diving in, the focus today was Christianity Today.
Yes.
That was one of their big focus was Christianity Today. Some of the players we've been talking about, and my favorite is when I post this on YouTube. Every time we bring up one of these names, it literally puts like their face on the YouTube post. I don't know if you've seen that yet or not.
Yeah.
Who they are, what they do. So every time I mention up a name, boom, it's a tagged on there. But you see the Russell Moores, you see the Rockefellers,
David
Soroses, the Gospel Coalitions, all those names that we've been repeating time and time again, and just kind of shows you the wide net they have in our evangelical societies, and kind of go from there. In the first page, it talks about in one interview, and she was talking about Christianity Today and their leanings over the last, was it? She say really 10 years, 15 years. I think Christianity Today is always kind of leaned that way, just a little bit anyway.
Yeah.
But they've gotten really bad over the last 15 years or so.
Yeah.
I didn't want to interview a professed Christian psychology professor bemoaned the fact that the states have been banning transgender medicines and surgeries for children because they are complex clinical issues. A highly radical, diverse essay titled "White Churches, It's Time to Go Pro-Life on Gun Control" said alt-right racism was responsible for making Donald Trump president. The author demanded that white pastors lobby for their governments for gun restrictions, that there are dozens of reports promoting lax border policies with no counterbalance to show the harms of unfettered legal immigration, a topic Barron knew well as a California resident for some 40 years. It was all far more political than we've ever remembered and far more progressive. Recalling that he had a family friend with the inner workings of evangelical media, he texted me, is Christianity Today going woke? And that person she was talking about was an old pastor that had retired and hadn't read Christianity Today and turned around and looked at it and said, what is going on with this? And we see here, and so she takes that and goes, what happened? Well, we start diving into the funding, and that's where it gets exciting.
Yeah, it's just interesting when you dive into it that the readers, and she makes this point, the readers and other Christians, that's not where the funding comes from for these groups. And part of that is because I think a lot more Christians have become discerning, and they have seen through some of this nonsense that you read. And truthfully, we don't read Christianity Today. I mean, at all. So we like went today and looked at it real quick, and it's just reiterated the fact that we're not going to look at it very often, and we would recommend you not either. But what I think we want to point out is some of the contributors, some of the main authors on there are very popular amongst the circuit. So we're talking major news organizations, major news outlets like New York Times, CNN, MSNBC, all these organizations. These names will keep popping up, and many, when they're watching, they're going to say, oh, I've seen this guy on here before. Oh, he's a Christian because he says he is. I can trust what he says on this matter. And unfortunately, these are the same individuals who are being funded from organizations like Christianity Today, who is being funded from an organization that is not Christian in any way possible.
To put what you're saying another way is like, let's take the news circuit, right? We're going to see these things. We're going to see the progressive, highly liberal lean, and then they're going to tag a Christianity Today, which has been known as an evangelical hub. Oh, Christianity Today agrees with this. Oh, look what these politicians are pushing. It's so right wing that evangelicals don't even follow. Christianity Today is on the other side of this. Okay, and you'll see this stuff pushed up with books, and again, news media, and they'll point to it as a hub of the fact of, oh, even conservative Christians, even they don't back these things. This is way too far for them. Look how right wing yada 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 is. Okay. Yeah. That's the whip. That's the weapon that they use. And Christianity Today had been known to be a conservative Christian hub, a platform.
Yeah.
And Megan talks about how those trying to influence and really radicalize the evangelical churches realize that, and so they start pumping money into it. And so here's what's really frustrating to me. I'm going to be an old man yelling at the clouds here. But what's so frustrating to me is it's so disheartening to go, you know what? Christianity Today is not even being supported that well in the evangelical circles. They probably cannot stand alone by themselves to be a reputable source anymore, but it doesn't matter because their real funding is coming from these leftist Rockefellers or the Soroses. They're being propped up and funded by all these liberal leaning people that are pushing for their agenda. And what's frustrating about that is people would look at it as, oh, this is what evangelicals think.
Yeah.
But it's not. Like, they don't have their finger on the pulse of the normal run-of-the-mill evangelical church. They're just elite, intelligent, or the intellectual people that are being controlled by their funding. And they are trying to push this idea that the evangelical world, though it's got many problems, don't get me wrong, the evangelical world thinks this way, but when you actually get down to the nuts and bolts of the situation, 70%, 80% of them do not think this way whatsoever. But again, it's a smokescreen because it looks that way. And that's what's so frustrating to me. And how do we stop that? How do we combat this? Because it's not like, well, don't read Christianity Today. I haven't, but they're still going to be funded and again, that's me whining, but
yeah. Well, it's even worse because it's not just that they're liberal leaning; it's that they are anti-Christian.
Yeah,
to the core.
Thank you.
Like, these are people.
You said what I needed to say, and I softened it up. Good work.
These are people who they are against everything we are about and are trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
And so the question would be, so why are they doing it? And that's what we're getting back to. Well, the more drifting away from solid theology that an organization takes, the more influence it has on other organizations, the more influence it has on social media readers, blog readers, internet readers, whatever it may be, political establishments. The more influence they are, the more we become, well, they believe that, so it's okay if I start going that way too, because these big names, all these people, they believe that too. So I'm okay believing that. Like one of these organizations, Lilly Endowment, is one of the ones that gives a lot of money, or the Thriving in Ministry Initiative is one of the other organizations. Here's what they believe. They believe and promote abortion, reparations, illegal immigration, amnesty, and LGBTQ ideology. Now, we may have some differences on a few of those, but there's a few that we will not. And we've talked about that. The abortion, the LGBTQ ideology stuff, there's no, like, we're not having a conversation because the scriptures are clear on that. So these are people who are funding these organizations. And let's be honest, Christianity Today is not around if it wasn't for these liberal, unchristian organizations backing them. And that's just a matter of fact, as you look at the money details. So as we look at this, we have to ask ourselves, why would we want to be influenced and, again, promote an organization that is ultimately funded by those who are not Christian at all? And then why would this organization take that money? That's what bothers me too.
Well, and you hit on something else. As it moves the evangelicals to the left, why does that happen? Well, part of that happens because what they do is they go, you know what? Like, these people are writing books. They're better Christians than I am. Look how smart they are. I'm not near as smart as them. They're looking at the issues, and they're conservative evangelicals just like me. They're writing books. They're the top of the line in their colleges, or yada yada yada. They're a part of these big organizations, and so it's that elitist mentality. And who are we? We're just simple farmers out here in the middle of the cow pasture. And so we lean that direction. We look that direction. These are our intellectuals. We want to, follow suit with some of their saying, because again, they supposedly hold to the same convictions we do. And if they're leaning this direction, well, I'm just getting tied up in the rhetoric, and I don't realize that I'm off biblical base.
Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of, again, that's how they pull you one direction.
Yeah.
With these elitist thought process.
Yeah. And here, it plays out like this. As they are more influenced, you start seeing articles about abortion friendliness and loving your illegal immigrant neighbors and all these things that we're like, where did this come from? What is Christian about this? And then it starts making you think, well, maybe this is the Christian way to think about this. And even though it's being influenced by those unchristian donors that gave so much money.
And you got to realize they have to fill it with half truths.
Yes.
Or it'll be completely rejected. And that's why I started off earlier and said why I'm so frustrated is because they won't just stand up and say what they're trying to do, because they know they'll be completely and utterly rejected. Just like Satan in the garden. He didn't stand up and tell Eve exactly what he was doing. He was weaving his way through there, and you eat that, you'll become like God. You'll know good and evil, which was partly true, right? And so these guys are coming through here and doing it in a sneaky fashion. They're not going to come up straight up and tell you what they're doing, because they know that if you do that, they will be spit out. They will be rejected. And so they've got to pretend like they hold to these certain values, and then they'll just continue to drip this stuff in. It'll slowly add more and more poison to the point where they, it's just slow and steady as they go. She pointed to something that I had thought for a long time, and was pointed out to me by a professor that really was really kicked out of a college. And he pointed out the fact of what's these pull? Like, these guys used to be solid, and they get up into higher academia and they do this and that. And what's pulling them away? What's happening? Why all of a sudden do they start losing their convictions on stuff? Like, again, I've said it before. Russell Moore is a huge player. Like, I wouldn't touch that guy with a 10-foot pole. But if you would read Russell Moore from 15 years ago, oh yeah, like, he said some solid stuff. Like, he said some really good, solid stuff 10, 15 years ago. And now he looks nothing like he used to. Why is that? Well, and Megan points out the fact that there's a tendency, once you get to the higher echelon of academia and high society, I want to use that term, that may be wrong, but there's an underlying desire, just human heart in general, where they want to be patted on the back and they want to be recognized as elite. They want to be recognized as highly intellectual. And not just from Christians. They want the world to go behind them and go, hey, you're smart. You're smart. You're part of us. You're part of the intellectual group. Generally speaking, to do that, you have to throw your biblical convictions aside, because they won't accept them. You have to water down your biblical convictions.
Yeah.
And that's what she pointed to.
Say it's what she says almost, I think, every chapter. There's this plea to love your neighbor.
Yeah.
And you cannot love your neighbor unless you compromise in some way. And that's what you're getting at here, is that there's this desire to love their neighbor. And I would take it a step further and say there's just this fascination with being liked by the world.
Yes.
That I don't, because I think they may have had good motives in the beginning, I'm hoping at least, but soon after they have compromised so much that it's like, I don't even know who you are anymore. Like, you just don't, you're not the same person.
So let me hit this point as well, because she brought it up and it's a big one. Out of the editors of Christianity Today, I'm not saying all of them donated. I'm not saying all of them are this way, but every person that donated anything to a political cause, every single one of them from Christianity Today were Democrat. Everyone. And that's also been a theme, that she points to these things. Like, almost, I mean, it's just completely and utterly lopsided. Mm-hmm. And again, you see the push that is being taken place. But she had this to say. She says, after he left the magazine, a former editor-in-chief, I'm going to mess up his name, so I'm going to say it, admitted in a since deleted essay that the staff is driven by a deep desire for the approval of secular elites. Mm-hmm. And she quoted, elite evangelicalism. We call it Big Eva sometimes here. We're making you hip. He represented by Christianity Today, Ivy Press, World Vision, Fuller Seminary, and a host of other established organizations, is too often a form of cultural accommodation dressed as conventional religion, and these evangelicals want to appear respectable to the elite of American culture. She goes on to say, a part of the reason for this was explained because there was members of the evangelical media fancy themselves as elite. For the longest time, a thrill went through the office when Christianity Today, or evangelicalism in general, was mentioned in a positive vein by the New York Times, the Atlantic, or other such leading mainstream publications. The feeling in the air was, we made it, we're respected, end quote. And that tells you right there is the driving force behind a lot of it.
Yeah.
And you can find ways to sugarcoat that to where you're just trying to get the gospel message out, and they will. If they respect us more, they mention us in the paper, we're going to get more eyes on us, and that way we can, get more Jesus to people and all that kind of stuff. And that's great and okay, but that when you've compromised the message so much that the people that hate Jesus are respecting you, what are you doing in the end? And that's what I would point to.
It shows a lack of character. It
Yeah.
shows a lack of, like, you cannot trust somebody who says one thing out of one side of their mouth and something else out of the other side.
Yes.
You cannot trust them any longer. And they have exposed who they really are and their lack of character that they have.
I want to continue with her. I think this is just so important.
Oh, yeah, it's good.
Mindset. He says he acknowledged that the hunger for worldly respectability drives Christianity Today's editors' decisions as well, not in just what the editors cover, but also what they choose not to cover. And that's the big thing with the ELRC. We've talked about that if you watch our other videos about the ERLC. And our frustration with them as they just went quiet on so many different levels, on so many different things. But he goes on to say, she points to two things. They refuse to talk about the biblical mandate for men only as pastors and leaders inside the church. They refuse to talk about that type of stuff. They refuse to deal with women pastors and the big push for that. They don't talk about that. They said it's been 30 years since this Christianity Today argued for a 6-day creation. And instead they have taken the secular position that Earth is 1 billion years old. 30 years. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's absolutely insane. That again, okay, let's say we can have an argument about that. Great, but it's at least an argument.
Yeah.
But to just not mention it for 30 years is pretty telling.
Which should also tell you, well, what are they talking about then when it comes to creation? Like, are they just teaching an evolution perspective, or like, what I mean? It just tells you all you need to know.
It said it's been 30 years. Christianity Today has not run an article in the last 30 years, argued for or assumed a 6-day creation. Instead, it publishes writers who take the respectable secular position that the earth is billions of years old. So that tells you right there is what they're pushing. They're not platforming anybody that holds to that position. If they're talking about science, it seems they're going to be platforming somebody that's 1 billion, old Earth at very least, position there. And it tells you, again, I'm shows you my frustration.
Yeah.
It's just a frustrating thing.
Yeah. I understand.
And again, it's giving, at least they're trying to give the idea that, evangelicals don't believe in 6-day creation. Like, nobody believes in that. Like, what are you talking about? We've long went past that thing. That's what 30 years of silence is at least telling me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. I know. It's just frustrating, and we get frustrated by it because in a lot of ways it not only makes our jobs harder, but it also so many fall for this, and so it just, we have to just be so much more, and two, there's another side of this as well that we haven't even talked about. Well, I guess you did a little bit, but is that, a lot of these individuals, they're part of big city churches. I mean, Russell Moore, Nashville, and some of these other guys in Nashville and some other bigger city places. And, they rarely ever talk about the small town, rural pastor who's doing his thing, who's been faithful, who is striving to be faithful, who doesn't have a big name, all that kind of stuff. And it's almost like those individuals now don't really matter. And that part's frustrating for us as well. Not that we deserve a bigger platform. It's just that, there's guys out there being faithful to the word, preaching the scriptures, and you'll never know about them.
Something else she pointed out that I thought was just spectacular, and this is the end of this section. She says, what happened to Christianity today is a story common to any number of once faithful evangelical institutions. Part of it, no doubt, organic, as predicted by the famous first law coined by British politician pundit John O'Sullivan. I don't know what, do you know him? I don't. But anyway,
I have read about him, but
first law anyway says all organizations that are not explicitly right-wing will over time become left-wing. Hebrews chapter 2 verse 1 says it warns of a similar tendency when it comes to theological matters. Therefore, we must give the more earnest heed to the things which we have heard, lest we drift away. And she ends that little section with this. Progressives will hollow out your trusted institutions and wear them like skin suits. That is, from the outside, the institutions will still use the lingo and symbols of the Christian faith, but look at them a little more closely and you'll discover something newly alien within. I think that is a terrific picture and a terrific way to put it. Good writers, man. She put it pretty good there.
The scriptures call it wolves in sheep's clothing.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. Hollows out the once good institutions, hollows them out and wears them like a skin suit. And Christianity today is exactly that. Exactly that.
Yeah. Now, I think our next section, it starts dealing with specific organizations, because I don't think all these organizations may have started with the goal of getting to where they are now. With drifting so far towards unchristian doctrine, but many have gone that way. And it was often the donors, once these organizations found out who was giving all this money, many have grown upset with their own organizations that they even founded. So let's jump into this because I think it is important.
Do you want to name them off? I know you're taking care of business right now. Do you want to name them off?
Sure. Let's start with.
I'll be honest. I read through that part a little faster, and
yeah,
I'm not really good with names, and so I just kind of ran through them. A couple stuck, a couple didn't, and then I went on to the political side of it. So
yeah,
I can't back that much.
Os Guinness, who I actually like some of his books. There's some things we wouldn't agree on, but yeah, there's one called the Trinity Forum that he was involved with. I had heard of that one, but I didn't know much about it. There's others that Rockefellers were involved in. Trying to look here, reading through some of these. And it's honestly, you start seeing the shifts based off who is in charge. And when bad leaders take over, there seems to be this drifting that takes over pretty quickly. And that's really what happened to Trinity's organization, Trinity's Forum, is that the leadership changed and pretty soon went off the rocker. And she makes clear, it's right before the political evangelical title. She makes clear, she says, one of Trinity's biggest backers today is the man researchers who track the intersection of money and politics call the new George Soros. So this guy just keeps coming up more and more and more. And you just have to wonder, what are these organizations thinking?
Yep. And again, there's got to be greed in there. I mean, love of money. Some sort.
Yeah, good point. That's a very good point.
The love of money is the root of all sorts of evil. You got to remember that. And again, this is how you justify it. This is how I would justify it. Hopefully that never happens to me, but I see the justification pretty easily. The justification is, well, we're going to have to shut this down and we're going to lose our witness. So let's take this money. It's going to keep us afloat and we'll be able to continue to witness. It's all justification that way is, well, this is not the best, but we will be able to get the message out no matter how much it's watered down or this and that. And again, that's just the process of how you start justifying it. Once you get into that boat, there's no guardrails. You're going right down the stream. And I think some of them are that way. I think others are just straight up wolves and they know exactly what they're doing. And that has been their intention. And,
and I think one person that we read a lot, he's in the New York Times a lot, David French is one of those individuals.
Yes.
I truly don't know if this person is even a believer based off some of the things he says. And he makes the point. He says he called conservative Christians dominionists who want not just religious freedom, but religious authority, as demonstrated by their efforts to purge books off school library shelves. He didn't bother mentioning that the books in question were in middle school libraries and that they depicted all sorts of pornographic images and other things like that, that middle school and our children, we would prefer not to see.
Yeah.
And
the worst of the worst.
And adults not see, but you know what I mean there.
Yeah.
So that should tell you a little bit where a guy like David French, who we would call a wolf, is coming from. Like he's by calling out the conservative Christians on that matter, he's aligning himself and basically saying, even if he would never say, I'm okay with that, he is saying I'm okay with that, or he's at least able to say that he's okay with organizations who push for that because they are part of who is backing him. And now he has aligned himself with that.
Let me try to summarize the political end of it quickly. And if you need to add things to it, do it.
Go for it.
But the best way I can describe the Russell Moores, the David Frenches, and all these organizations that are funding this big push, they're doing a bait and switch. What they're trying to do is tell you, if you're a conservative evangelical Christian, you were way too political. That you have went in bed with Trump and all of these people. You're way too political. You have lost the gospel in your political pushes, and you are more about you're more about the Republican Party than you are about Jesus. That's what they're trying to tell you. But at the same time, they are actually way more political than you ever thought you ever even thought about. And they are pushing more grotesque, anti-biblical left-wing narratives down our throat, like David French, who tries to point to us and say, "Oh, you're more, you're not even talking about religious freedom anymore. You're trying to take books. You're trying to becoming so domineering." And he's protecting pornographic, horrible book materials that Christians are trying to get off the shelf.
Yeah.
He is way more political. He is pushing his agenda way more than we are. But they're trying to put it on an axis that we're the political ones. We're the one getting in the mud with the political things. We're the one pushing white supremacy, or, again, every liberal talking point is if you're conservative at whatsoever, you're just you're a big white supremacist, KKK, all that kind of stuff. And it's nonsense. It's nonsense. They are really the political aim that they're trying to swing at us and make us look like we're the ones doing it.
Yeah. For example, in January of this year, she points out that French, Moore, and Curtis Chang, which I don't know him well, they partnered with some organizations to start what's called the After Party. Now, if you haven't heard about this, it is a Bible study curriculum that tries to bring politics and church and how to sort through a lot of it's done horrible. It's horrible, almost to the point where they pulled it right away because it was so bad. But the organizations, let me just tell you, it's Rockefellers, it's Hewlett Foundation, who is the second largest private donor to Planned Parenthood. should tell you all you need to know. Why are you taking money from an organization who totally is against everything the Bible teaches? Why?
And again, that curriculum had one sole goal, and it was all political. It was all political. It was all moving you to left-wing ideology and pushing you that direction. All the while, where they are full-fledged telling you, as a conservative evangelical, you're doing that. You're anti-Christian because you're doing that. You're jumping on the political bandwagon. I mean, it's just so unbelievable. And Megan goes on to point out the fact that if you do any studies in this whatsoever, the conservative evangelicals are a lot less political than the left-wingers.
Yeah.
I think that's a problem that conservatives have. Now, we don't want to go too far. Don't misquote me here. You don't want to go too far. But a lot of the times, conservatives are pushovers because what is our mindset? We want to be left alone. Leave us alone. We want the government to leave us alone. We want to be left alone. And so that mentality has hurt us some because the left-wing side of it, they don't want to be left alone. They want to shove it down your throat and make you bow, basically. Let's look at the LGBTQ plus. They came in as sheep's clothing and tried to tell us, gay marriage, that's not going to be a big deal. That's not going to hurt anybody. That just, that's not going to hurt you whatsoever. Now we're the complete opposite. Hey, if you don't put a rainbow flag on and run in our parades, you're going to get canceled. We're going to try to fire you from your job. And that's not how conservatives operate. Conservatives operate with the fact that we want to be left alone. We want the government to leave us alone. And general speaking, we don't really want to bother anybody else. And that is a hindrance to us. But we're being told, even in this position, we're being told that we're the over political ones. And it's nonsense. Yeah. Just utter nonsense.
I think I want to read one line because we're kind of wrapping up here. It's from Os Guinness. It says, during a recent podcast interview, Guinness said that Christians who buy the line off-pedaled by Christianity Today and current Trinity Forum fellows, that to be faithful believers means keeping their heads down, as the early Christians did under Rome, are dead wrong. The early church were faithful, yes, he said, but they were under an imperial dictatorship. We are in a republic where every citizen is responsible for the health and vitality of the republic. Guinness added that not to contend for God's laws in the political sphere would be a failure of citizenship. And I think what he's trying to drive home, what we're trying to drive home, is that we need to be careful, one, of what you were saying earlier, Michael, about greed, money. Not all money is good money, and that's just a matter of fact, and people can't have too much. That doesn't mean all money is wrong either. It doesn't. I mean, you can have a lot of money and do a lot of great things with it, but we need to be careful about our motives and what we are willing to, if we're willing to compromise for that money, it should teach us a lot about where our character and our integrity is.
She quoted Proverbs 29:2. The common grace of just laws benefits everyone in the society, whether they know it or not. And I'm sure that's not a direct quote from Scripture, but I can bring that up in just a second. But it is true. The common grace of just laws benefits everybody. Godly laws are a good thing for everybody. And we have to realize that. And again, America was built on a Christian basis of law, a Christian basis of understanding. I'm not saying every founding father of America was a Christian, but they're agnostic, at least. They believed in a higher power. And what did they say? They said that our inalienable rights, I'm saying that wrong, were what? Given by the government? No. We're God-given. And the government needed to protect those rights that were God-given, not government-given. And it was based upon, again, a Christian foundation. And
Yeah.
we prospered because of it. Even though we didn't always live up to what we were shooting for, we have prospered because of it. And all that stuff is being taken away.
Yeah. And you know, I guess my final thing is I get asked a lot, well, Justin, how do I spot a wolf? How do I figure out where they are or who they are? And my answer is typically this, and it's what we've seen here. Look at the money trail. And if that's not clear, look at how much they talk about themselves. And then third, is what they're saying biblical or not? Or is it kind of biblical or not? Because even that is a red flag to me, because they can say some things that are half true. Like I think David French would say some things that are half true. But when you get down to where the rubber meets the road, he's clearly a wolf in promoting anti-biblical statements and making anti-biblical claims that we would not find in the scriptures. And we have to be careful. We have to be discerning.
Well, I've struggled to try to put this into words. But basically, I mean, I wish I could put it into better words. If your religious leader talks like the world, you've got a problem.
Yeah.
I guess it's a better, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
If all the touching points goes right along with every liberal leaning media, culture, everything else, if you would take Christian away from their name and take out some of the Christian lingo that they have sprinkled in, and it's literally the same thing that's being shoved down our throats in every area, you got a problem. And again, what they do is they take all that kind of stuff and they Christian lingo it and just sprinkle all these Christian words in there and these Christian phrases of love your neighbor and everything else. And you take that Christianese language out, and what you have is pro-abortion, pro-legal immigration, on and on and on and on and on, pro-LGBTQ plus. You obviously have a wolf. That is there. Does that make sense?
Yep. Totally.
I wish I could communicate that a little better than I'm doing.
No, you're good.
All right. Well,
next time I'm going to tell you, this chapter ticked me off more than any other. And if there was no other chapter you could read, this would be the one, because it has impacted every single one of us in a personal way, one way or another. And it deals with gracious dialogue, how the government used pastors to spread COVID-19 propaganda. And
I'm going to have to be muzzled our next video. I can tell you that right now, because I'm going to really get hostile with that. So, all right. Hey, there's a little teaser for anybody still watching.
There you go.
All right. See you next week.
Bye.
Lord willing. Bye.